Hello everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar, which will introduce a special edition of the Journal of Building Performance Simulation dedicated to the UN Sustainable Development Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. My name's Laurie McElroy and I'm President of IBPSA and one of the guest editors of the special edition. I am a professor in the Department of Architecture at the University of Strathclyde and a lifelong advocate of the embedding of simulation in the design process and the use of simulation to improve people's lives in a practical way. With me today are the other guest editors, Drs. Clarice Blyle de Souza and Camilla Pezzica from Cardiff University. Clarice is an associate professor teaching architectural technology and research methods, and her research interests are in interdisciplinary area of decision making in the built environment, including the use of digital tools, machine learning, models, and modelling applied to the areas of sustainable design and regenerative design for buildings to urban scale. Camilla is also an assistant professor in digital methods in architecture and urbanism, and her main research areas are urban morphology and transformations, human space interaction, methods and operational models for spatial analysis, and knowledge tools applied to urban modelling, simulation and design. And just to broaden the scope and to add gravitas to the panel discussion, we also have the editors of the Journal of Building Performance Simulation, Professors Hensen and Ian Beausoleil-Morrison. As most of you will know, the Journal of Building Performance Simulation provides a platform for building simulation related researchers and practitioners who are pushing boundaries in the use of simulation in practice to publish the latest research in the field. The journal aims to make a substantial and lasting contribution to the international building community by supporting authors and the high quality original research that they submit. The journal also offers a forum for original review papers and research case studies. Typically, the journal includes contributions that explore topics related to the theoretical aspects of modelling, buildings and communities, including the development of algorithms, systems modelling, performance optimization, uncertainty and validation, and others such as those listed here. It also covers education in modelling and simulation, interoperability issues, and case studies where they relate to the application of building performance simulation for any stage of the design, construction, commissioning, operation, or management of buildings and systems, if they include validation or aspects that make a novel contribution to the building performance simulation base. But for clarity, it's probably worth mentioning what the journal doesn't cover. The scope of the journal doesn't extend to the routine use of simulation in practice, the structural performance of buildings, and the durability of building component, or studies focused on the performance of buildings and the systems that serve them, rather than on modelling and simulation. Nor does it cover case studies involving the routine application of commercially available building performance simulation tools that do not include validation or aspects that make a novel contribution to the knowledge base. The structural performance of buildings and the durability of building components, and studies on buildings and systems that serve them. This special edition of the journal has been sparked by a resurgence of interest in wider sustainability issues at a community or urban scale, and the changing government policies in relation to the impact of climate change issues on the built environment. This has in part been driven by our experiences during the recent pandemic, and in part by the need to respond to the UN Sustainable Development Goals at an urban or community scale. In addition, the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development provides an ambitious and comprehensive plan with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And to advance the 2030 Agenda, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the UNECE, has adopted a nexus approach in its work. In other words, focusing on high impact areas where multiple Sustainable Development Goals converge. Sustainable and smart cities for all ages is arguably one of the highest impact nexus areas, combining all of the sustainable development goals shown on this slide. Cities are the centrepiece of economic, social and cultural life. Without localising sustainable development goals at the urban level, few can be effectively addressed at all. Cities represent a complex arrangement of many interrelated systems, both social and technical, so that they are best placed to address multiple sustainability goals at once. Cities also offer more rapid, practice-informed and grounded responses to sustainability challenges. However, to date, it's arguable that we have lacked the capability to undertake comprehensive, multi-domain evaluation of these interconnected issues due to a lack of integration and interoperability between tools. And this presents us with a significant opportunity for IBPSA. Traditionally, beyond interest in the 1980s on issues such as contaminant dispersal and heat island effects, simulation beyond the building boundary has in recent times been less prevalent than within our community. But recently, there's been a step change in interest. And since 2010, SimOD conferences have attempted to join simulation researchers, architects and urban planners to collaborate across a range of topics related to simulation, with special emphasis on methods that bridge disciplinary gaps between design, construction, operations, resource management, human behaviour and performance analytics across building and urban scales. The conference's simulation-centric approach provides a fertile testbed for new models, ideas and workflows that integrate buildings with their neighbourhoods and beyond. Another example which shows an appetite for our community to re-explore the urban scale was evidenced in the Building Simulation Conference of 2019 in Rome, which had a portfolio of 86 papers in this area. Specific topics of interest such as grid management, outdoor thermal comfort, large-scale retrofits, microclimatic effects, urban heat islands, green roofs, solar radiation, use of CFD in the external environment, daylight and so on, have connected buildings with neighbourhoods, districts and cities, showing that the IBPSA community is already preparing to take the next step. In addition, USIM, the Regional Urban Simulation Conference in the Scottish affiliate of IBPSA, is now in its third iteration with a conference this year. And unexpectedly, the conference attracted a significant international audience in 2018 and 20. So we hope for the same again. And while we look around the various IBPSA affiliate regions, there's evidence of a wide range and depth of activity emerging, from the use of simulation to support policy development and decision making for regional and national governments, for example, around building stock management and new approaches to handling big data at a municipal scale, to the role of simulation in accelerating the integration of smart technologies into smart grids, including everything from the deployment of renewables and clean energy at a city scale to the role of simulation in moving forward on e-mobility, new generation battery power stations, to the digital transformation and digital twinning at a building or city scale. In addition to a heightened public awareness of the importance of designing for well-being, there's a growing demand from industry for access to tools to support a much more integrated built environment. Again, this has great potential for IBPSA, but we feel that one reason why we're not publishing much in this area is because we're not capitalising on opportunities to take this to the next level. It could be argued that while the field is rapidly gaining momentum on the one hand, creating urban data streams and linking factors such as geographical information systems, city GML, and census data to building energy demand profiles to predict current and future conditions, there remains little evidence of alignment with parallel activity being undertaken in schools of urban design and planning, such as urban morphology, which includes the detailed analysis of physical form, street pattern, plots, and urban grain using cartographic sources. This research area creates layers of rich historical data telling the story of the evolution of our cities, and we simulationists could be capitalising on this while at the same time enabling the construction industry and researchers in the field to support delivery of Sustainable Development Goals specifically, and more widely the Sustainable Development Goals that are impacted by how cities perform. Through the evidence-based data with a view to creating people-smart, sustainable cities that foster sustainability and livability in an integrated manner, cities that are smart and sustainable and which plan for the future, ready for whatever happens. From a policy perspective, governments must activate the capabilities of cities to implement sustainable solutions by promoting a culture of innovation and deliberation, which systematically explores new opportunities, identifies what works and what doesn't, unlocks untapped potential, and generates new values by overcoming fragmentation and inefficiency. To do this, they need metrics against which to measure. But as things stand, the Sustainable Development Goals are loosely defined in terms of metrics against which to measure progress. And again, we see this as an opportunity for IBPSA. So I'll now pass you on to Clarice Blel de Souza, who will elaborate on this in relation to the special issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. I'll show my screen. Should be able to see my slides now. Yeah? Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. So thank you, Laurie. For those who do not know, the UN Sustainable Development Goals are basically an urgent call for action by all countries in global partnership. And the idea is to provide a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. So they are basically a global approach to reach no poverty, reduce inequalities, and tackle climate action, preserving our oceans and forests, supported by improvements in health, education, and economic growth. And they are basically the outcomes of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was a plan for action for people, planet, and prosperity. So the pyramid that you can see there on the image basically shows 10 very ambitious goals related to people at the bottom, which are no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, and reduced inequalities. These goals are not anymore exclusive to the Global South, considering that the many years of economic austerity that were imposed on the Global North, which are now very evident in controlling COVID and also the recent crisis in the energy markets. The pyramid also shows the 5 very ambitious goals related to the environment, some of which desperately are attempting to mitigate ecological decline, as you can see, starting with sustainable cities and development, the very topic of our debate today, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, and life on land. And these goals are directly related to our dependency on natural resources, which affect all of us, regardless of where we are, and without which we cannot reach the very top of the pyramid, which aims for peace and justice for all throughout worldwide partnerships. So let's like children now, what we want is to call the world for action. We are calling the world for action like the children. We are calling the IBPSA community for action now. We are just setting up this provocation, because through buildings we shape human settlements, neighborhoods, districts, communities, and cities, and that their configurations impact on the way people inhabit spaces, live, and react. So it's time for us to be responsible for rethinking our cities, neighborhoods, and the way we live, and properly align this with main initiatives worldwide, which are pursuing the agenda of creating sustainable cities and communities for all. We have gone beyond the target of designing buildings which reduce carbon emissions. We have to provide safe, healthy places for people to live and work in, quicker, cheaper, and better than ever before, especially in the emerging and fragile economies where the progress is critical, where biodiversity is in decline, and mitigation and adaptation to climate change and several types of disasters are completely mandatory. So UN SDG11 is exactly at the center of that. It acts as a catalyzer because it aims to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So SDG11 contains 10 targets and 15 monitoring indicators, which basically include ensure access to adequate, safe, and affordable housing together with its basic services. Note that 1 billion of the world population live in slums, so this is a big one. Ensure access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport, expanding the public networks to reach the vulnerable. And again, note that half of the world population does not have this at all. Enhance capacity for participation, integration, and sustainable settlement planning and management. Protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. Reduce the number of deaths and people affected by disasters of all types. Reduce the environmental impact of cities with special attention to air quality and waste management. Provide universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces. And again, note that cities have in general half of the amount of public spaces recommended by UN settlement programs. Support positive economic, social, and environmental links between urban and rural areas. Adopt and implement integrated policies and plans towards inclusion, resource efficiency, mitigation and adaptation to climate change, and resilience to disaster, considering risks at all levels. And finally, support developing countries with financial and technical assistance to build using local materials. Now we can see that at least half of these targets are relevant to our IBPSA community, especially targets 11.3, which is related to integrated and sustainable settlement planning and management. Target 11.5, which is about disaster risk reduction. Target 11.6, which reduces the environmental impact of cities with special attention to air quality and waste management. Target 11.7, which provides universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces, because we also build public spaces, not only buildings. And then finally, Target 11B, which is the adoption and implementation of integrated policies and plans towards inclusion, resource efficiency, mitigation and adaptation to climate change, and resilience to disaster, again, considering risks at all levels. We can also identify some other potential relevant targets, such as, for instance, to ensure access to adequate, safe, and affordable housing together with its basic services, which is goal 11.1, and also goal 11.2, which is to ensure access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport, expanding the public network to reach the vulnerable. So Laurie showed earlier initiatives which clearly indicate that the IBPSA community is actually ready to jump to a next step. But what is this next step? How does it look like? We need to stop feeding practitioners with what looks like dashboards on nuclear power stations. We need to contextualize our simulations to see them as an important tool to aid researchers, academics, and practitioners to tackle grand challenges. To have our ultimate aims very clear when developing new tools, methods, and workflows, because most of the time these are done in disciplinary silos. And we think by bridging these silos, it's actually important by gluing things together through further mathematical methods that have little effect in practice, as they only cater for a small part of the universe of parameters that these practitioners deal with when developing design solutions. So we have a lot of different simulation tools and models working in isolation towards solving specific problems, technical problems, disconnected from the complex reality of designing neighborhoods, districts, and cities, which involve actually developing solutions that not only cater for energy transitions, but also have to consider universal accessibility, accessibility to green and blue infrastructures, the inclusion and design of green and blue infrastructures, the reduction of air pollution, mitigation of flooding, etc. So at the end of the day, we leave our colleagues in practice to deal with a collage of KPIs, which look not very different from this nuclear power station dashboard, right? They have to make sense of tons of information, propose punctual solutions to deal with each part of this complexity, which many times leads to creating buildings, neighborhoods, and cities which look like a collage of a technical paraphernalia, which is resource intensive and expensive, and contributes to accentuating inequalities and environmental destruction. So this special issue is a call for us to abandon our paradigm to work in silos and to understand we have a limited amount of time to develop tools and workflows which help our practitioners to develop integrated solutions. We are good at developing tools which produce robust evidence. Now let's focus on integrating this knowledge. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of practitioners having to design for grand challenges and try to understand what their ultimate goals are and what design parameters are shared between different knowledge domains so we can develop models and workflows which cater for this. Ultimately, design is about synthesis. It is to provide one single material response to a set of problems. And integrated solutions need conflict resolution and reconciliation, not a collage of technologies. So practitioners need tools which help them to reason with a set of design parameters which are common to many knowledge domains and therefore will be used to achieve multiple goals. Can we give them tools and workflows which help them achieve this? Our intention with this special issue is to put the IBPSA up to speed with what is happening in relation to the grand challenges, towards which we can offer a unique contribution as a community to develop workflows, integrated models from different domains and disciplines to evidence-based, solve conflict and/or reconcile design solutions towards achieving the UN SDG11, which is about sustainable cities and communities. And with this special issue, we intend to showcase examples in which simulation workflows, integrated models from different domains or disciplines are used to evidence-based, solve conflicts, and reconcile design solutions toward achieving UN Sustainable Development Goal 11. So we want to unfold the hidden potential of the community, of the building performance simulation community, to demonstrate that buildings transcend their boundaries and perform within bioregions, which gravitate around specific natural ecosystems and social communities. We want to focus on articles which use modeling and simulation as a true record of the design process to trace decisions which promote regeneration and integrated design to create buildings and neighborhoods in which their inhabitants' lives and livelihoods depend on the healthy functioning of local ecosystems in synergy with urban infrastructure landscapes. This is sort of a manifesto, with simulation providing the evidence to provoke a more active debate in mitigating the environmental impacts of climate change while building resilient communities in tune with the UN blueprint to achieve sustainable future for all. So working within USDG 11, we want to invite you all to put forward original research in multi-domain simulation models to evidence-based the design process towards achieving sustainable neighborhoods, and that is simulation workflows to maximize indoor environment relationships in urban settlements, towards promoting healthy communities, considering access to daylight, solar, greenery, etc. Integrated sustainable transport, simulation workflows which prioritize travelers and connect micro-simulation models with transport, configuration analysis, environmental models, and things like that to design transport infrastructures. Integrated public spaces, so simulation workflows which promote and enhance the use of outdoor spaces, such as, for example, parks and streets, via ensuring outdoor thermal comfort, access to greenery, pollution and noise control, wayfinding and spatial accessibility, managing people's flows, visual comfort, etc. Sustainable and integrated land use, so simulation workflows which support disaster risk reduction, mitigate urban heat island effects, flood and waste management while increasing access to greenery and amenities, because we know it's a goal of the UN to increase the amount of public spaces in cities. Also low carbon districts or neighborhoods, workflows which actually maximize the use of resources, electricity, heat and water, for example, within sustainable multifunctional complexes or districts towards reducing carbon footprints, improving community well-being and strengthening local capacity. And finally, also look at disaster and preparedness and post-disaster relief, which basically are workflows which cater for an increase in understanding of risk and contemporary urban and rural contexts and can contribute to enhance the resilience of built assets and infrastructure systems towards improving their response and recovery. from threats posed by hazard. So let's explore the practicalities of this a bit further and invite the two editors of the journal to a roundtable discussion about contributions to this special issue. I pass the word now to my colleague, Dr. Camila Pezzica, to coordinate this roundtable discussion, and we will then open the floor to Q&As.
Well, thank you very much, Clarice, and thanks to Ian and Jean who are here to answer our questions today. Moving to the first one straight away, if you can please change slide. Thank you. Jean, Jean, can you please clarify for us what are the process and timeline for the publication?
You're on mute, Jan.
Yeah.
You're still muted, Jan. The panel shows that you are unmuted, but probably your hardware is not recognizing that, Jan. Or Ian can take this until.
Sure, maybe I'll take this one while you sort out your computer, Jan. So in terms of process and timeline, we treat special issues differently than normal articles. In a normal submission, you would submit directly to the journal, and then as editors, Jan and I would handle the review process of that. With the special issue, you will interact directly with the special issue guest editors, and they will help you to guide you to ensure that your contribution is going to be well aligned with the objectives of the special issue, and they'll provide you some feedback, but treat that as not binding feedback. At that point, they're really helping you and guiding you to get prepare your manuscript. Once it's ready, you'll then submit it to the journal, and then Jan and I will handle it, and we will have these manuscripts reviewed in the context of this special issue. But the reviewers will be looking for the same criteria that we apply for most papers. We want to ensure that it's well aligned with the journal's aims and scope. We want to ensure that it's making a significant and lasting contribution to the literature. So we'll handle it in the review process. Typically, you'll receive a decision within 1 to 1.5 months, an initial decision, and it's extremely rare that manuscripts would be accepted on first submission. So you would normally get some comments back from the reviewers, and you'd be encouraged to address those comments and resubmit. There's no fixed deadline for submitting. From our perspective, it's more important that we have a high quality special issue rather than meeting a certain schedule. So we're leaving it to the special issue guest editors to set their timeline, but it's not really cast in stone. If an article is submitted a week or two later than the published deadlines, we'll still consider it. In the end, we will publish the special issue once we have a sufficient number of articles to make a coherent issue, and that could be 6 months from now, it could be 12 months from now. It really depends upon the authors and the review process.
Well, thank you very much for your thorough answer, Ian. Jean, are you now able to talk? Can I know? Well, so Ian, if you want to take the next questions as well, that would be brilliant.
Talk, do you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah, fantastic. So you may want to take the next one then, which is about open access publishing. Can one publish a paper open access?
Of course, that's no problem. You can, as an author, you can decide open access or not. And so it doesn't have to be that the whole special issue is open access. It goes by paper.
Right.
So the authors decide and make arrangements with the publisher.
And there is a fee associated with that. I don't remember what the current fee is, but there's a published fee schedule. But the author would, as Jan is saying, would elect whether or not they want to publish as open access once the review process has been completed and it's going towards publication.
Great.
I didn't say about the fee because there are some countries and some, let's say, groups of universities who have like a collective agreement, and then you as an author you don't have to pay yourself. It goes through that collective agreement.
That's really important to specify. Thank you for that. So I have another some other practical questions, and if Clarice, you may want to take it to the next slide. Fantastic. So these were intended to be for Ian, but of course, Jan, please tap into it if you feel you want to add anything. So the first question: can practitioners publish case studies, Ian?
Yeah, so case studies, we haven't published a large number of case studies in the journal, but we are open to case studies. The important thing is the case studies can't simply involve the routine application of commercial building performance simulation tools. There has to be a novel aspect, and that novel aspect might be a unique application. It might be the integration of the simulation tools and the design practice in a unique way. It might involve some empirical validation, but there has to be something that's novel about that as opposed to a routine application of tools.
Brilliant, thank you.
And the novelty needs to be in the modeling and simulation, not in, for example, not in new novel information about energy in buildings, for example, yeah? Because that would be too wide.
So may I ask you also to clarify what's the difference between new applications and new developments in simulation?
So maybe if I can, so I think it would be very good to make a sort of like a distinction between modeling, simulation, application, languages, and tools. This all sounds similar, but it's all quite different, in my view. Yeah? So a model is making some representation of some artifact or some process. Simulation is about using models, which are written in a certain language, by the way. So simulation is using these models to do some sort of like virtual experiments, if you will, try to predict something in the real world. Okay. An application is usually using models and simulation applied to some theoretical or practical problem. So applications depend on models and on simulation and on tools and on languages, but it's not exactly the same.
Yeah, very clear. Well, thank you for that. And on another note, my final question for you would be, how can people outside the community, the current community of the journal Building Performance Simulation, can connect to it via the special issue?
I'm not sure how you mean connect, because it's, I mean, the journal is open and readable for anybody. For example, we announce it in the IBPSA newsletter. And the publishers are very active in promoting the journal to whoever could be interested. So it's not close to anyone, if you want. But having said that, because you also speak about practitioners, I'm personally not 100% or not at all convinced that this journal is really very interesting for practitioners, because it's really a research journal. And so maybe the newsletter or the national and international conferences are more easy way for practitioners to know about what's going on. In my experience, practitioners are usually, or they are very interested, but they usually want to know, what can I use already tomorrow or next week? Whereas research very often has a longer time horizon, if you want. So I think we should be a little bit careful in making expectations which are not exactly correct.
Well, thank you. Do you want to add anything to these, Ian, before we move to the next questions?
Yeah, you know, as Jan is saying, it's although the Journal of Building Performance Simulation is IBPSA's journal, it's certainly open. We have many readers who aren't IBPSA members. We have many authors who aren't IBPSA members. We're open to contributions and participation by all, anyone who has an interest in building performance simulation. And as Jan is saying, it's really not so much geared towards the practitioners, very much a research-oriented journal.
Well, thank you. I think that was very clear. And Clarice, if you want to change the slide, please. Now I'd like to ask a more general kind of question to our guest editor, Laurie McElroy. So Laurie, what about knowledge transfer then? And where is the line, you reckon, between it and new developments in simulations?
Thanks, Camilla. I think this follows on quite nicely from what Jan was saying. I feel that the line between knowledge transfer and new developments in simulation is a tricky one. IBPSA champions the use of simulation in practice, but this is different from the routine use of commercial tools to number crunch our way towards a design problem solution, as Jan just said. But many in the industry do want to transfer simulation technology into the design process. But it can be difficult for them for a number of reasons. I think predominantly because the construction industry is time and resource pressured, and I think Jan already touched on this, but it therefore doesn't really embrace change unless there's evidence that this will have a positive benefit financially, whether in terms of kudos, attracting new clients, for example, or just in terms of straightforward profit and benefits to the bottom line. But in addition, I think there's a lack of commitment within industry to changing the design process to maximise the positive impact that simulation could have. And that, again, anything that takes time, I mean, whether it's as simple as, you know, how do you build a more energy efficient house? You'll get house builders who come to you and say, well, you know, it's too expensive to do that. And it's not so much that it's expensive, but it's the time, the expense is in the recrafting of the process, and that goes for simulation too. I think we have to look at, for example, our collective architectural plans of work to see where simulation can fit into that, to find a kind of natural progression between stages in the design process where simulation can have the most influence. And this problem is also fueled by the fact that there's little support available to prove to industry that it's worthwhile. Again, many of the most useful tools for practice, the things that they'd get the best value out of, are not practice ready. They're a bit ragged at the edges and difficult to use routinely. So that comes back to the point that Jan made about timescales within industry being different from timescales in research. But because of all of this, practice has to live with the frustration of using these black box type tools, where if they want something to be done differently, they have to go back to the developer and ask for a change, or ask for them to do some kind of internal calculation or simulation in order for them to get the answer that they want. But they never really get close to working out, working through the nuances of how a simulation tool would work compared with a calculation tool. And I think from an IBPSA perspective, the simulation community wants simulations to be used in practice, but there's a general lack of commitment to support and publish work in this area. And yet the validity of simulations can only be tested in practice itself. So there is a bit of a mismatch here with all of that. So there's a need to inspire new and future development. And at the end of the day, I think that unless we all change, simulationists as well as practitioners, then unless we all change, nothing will change. So somebody has to bite the bullet to take this forward.
Well, thanks, Laurie. And I completely agree with you. Well, thanks, Clarice. Now,
So
I believe,
here,
Laurie, you might, yeah.
So here we have a question for Camilla. So, which is, how do you think technicians can best contribute to their implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly Sustainable Development Goal 11 in practice?
Well, thanks, Clarice. I think this is an important question. And well, to state the obvious, my opinion is that technicians should do what they do best. They should act as technicians and produce evidence to inform decisions. This said, the evidence produced should not inform technical activities only, in my opinion. It should inform also strategic decisions concerning the implementation of larger scale transformative proposals. Through their analysis, technicians should produce and communicate information relevant to decision making. So the analysis should be decision driven rather than data driven. Now, data is important, of course, but to start with, technicians must be clear on what decisions needs to be made and then look for the data that is needed to make that decision. Technicians can inform decision makers in several different ways. For instance, they can support the development and evaluation of different scenarios. Additionally, they can help monitoring and assess the outcome of different initiatives to provide feedback to decision makers. And to give you a more concrete example of what I mean, the SDG set universal strategic goals that apply to different contexts. And we know that existing indicators used to monitor progress are not good enough. In fact, the progress indicators for SDG 11 specifically are considered ineffective to assess how far we are from building cities that are for people, which are truly sustainable. And when it comes to these, technicians, I think, are in a unique position to challenge existing practices, and they can propose the adoption of new indicators which are more helpful. So actually now, Clarissa, I'd like to ask you a final question, which somehow follows from this, which is a bit of a challenge, if you may. What do you think, in terms of data and knowledge, technicians aim to provide through the performance simulations to inform policy decisions?
Thanks, Camila. That is definitely a challenge because we don't exactly know the components of policy design, and the policymakers do not understand the technical aspects we have to deal with. So it's not here. I want to expand the question to include not only technicians, but also researchers and everybody that develops simulation tools. So therefore, for me, this question has two aspects. One aspect is an aspect of information management perspective, and the other one is an aspect of implementation, from an implementation perspective. So from an information management perspective, I think we desperately need simple to deploy workflows and knowledge transfer strategies so we can clearly produce and communicate evidence-based decisions and undertake scenario-based risk assessments in a way that is efficient throughout the whole life cycle of projects. So we can then inform policies and also provide the means for them to audit implementation, because very little is said about auditing implementation, and there are very little initiatives on using simulations to audit initiatives, which is an important thing because you can well see how things were planned and how they developed and how far apart they are. So we hope the special issue can perhaps contribute in this level at the neighborhood, district, and urban scales, to look at these aspects, to try and bridge a little bit the idea of putting forward new tools and new workflows, and then try to, in a way that they inform policies and they can be used to further develop and inform policies. So a bit more aligned between the two areas, the technical aspects as well as the policy aspects. But from an implementation perspective, I think it would be logical to think that we need a deep collaboration between researchers and policymakers. But we question this now because when we look at what's happening to our medical colleagues attempting to inform policies related to COVID and how frustrated they are and everything that's happening, that can be a bit tricky. So basically, we have an issue of trust that has been lost in many countries with this pandemic, that we need to somehow recover. But I think because they are actually making scientists and researchers, especially scientists and researchers, I would say, very skeptical about policies. And we know technologies exist there to inform policies and actually to make a lot of things to be implemented, but there is a lot still, a big distance between these technologies and their implementation, deployment in practice. And effective policies are crucial for that. in all countries, and that is not only in the global south but also in the north, and we need to be prepared to meet the grand challenges. But it seems that our policymakers might not have seen the urgency on that. So what I think, what can we do in this respect? I think we need to be a bit, I would say we need to be a bit more politically conscious, because like politicians, we make decisions, we make the practical decisions, but whether we like it or not, every practical decision has embedded in it some political implications. So I think we need to have the grand challenges clear in our heads so we can develop overarching goals and workflows to achieve them. Not only hitting known technical targets such as reaching net zero energy or carbon neutrality, but making sure we also work for the public good towards, for instance, reducing inequalities, increasing the amount of public spaces, increasing the use of public spaces and access to infrastructure, and so on. And we go towards the idea of the UN goals. Because after all, this is effectively what a whole system approach means. And we are all talking a lot about whole system approach, but without effectively engaging with what whole system approach means. And integrating ideas and practical solutions within UN frameworks towards producing a better future for all is actually a big thing in this whole system approach.
Well, thank you. I think we've finished with our round of questions. So if
Can I ask
Thanks. Yeah, Jan, go ahead, please.
because you speak about technicians, and that's a little bit confusing to me. So what do you mean exactly by technicians?
I think we mean all the technical people. In this case, I know technicians is a very complicated term, and sometimes it means people in practice. Sometimes it means for social scientists or for the humanities, it means everybody that's in the technical area. Either they are researchers, or they are in practice, or they are, So let's expand. I would say let's expand a little bit the idea that technicians in this case would be everybody that is responsible for either implementing something in practice or developing tools that would enable people to implement something in practice. So we are all responsible for somehow what will happen when it's about practice, when it's about making things happen. And I think that because of that, it's very important that we are in tune with this whole system approach, and that we understand this in a bit of an expanded way or beyond our remit, which is effectively to improve, to reduce energy consumption, to mitigate climate change and everything. But we also have to have in mind that this should not be done to the expenses of creating unequal societies, of reducing public space usage, of promoting individual things that would not enable us to live in society, and so on. And I think that is an important aspect, because a lot of that hasn't been potentially promoted lately by many policies, and perhaps we can influence that with our decisions. And that's basically what I was trying to say, that we could be a bit more aware of that and potentially put forward proposals and decisions that actually also cater for these aspects.
I absolutely agree with that. It was just about the word. I don't consider myself a technician. I have some technical skills, but also some other skills. And I try to do my best to achieve what you were saying. Maybe it's my understanding of the word technician.
Yeah, I just used it generically, like mainly as defined by, the humanities sees. Everybody that's not in humanities maybe more on either on the hard science or the technical part. And I don't believe we are on the hard science. I think we are more on the technical applied sciences.
Oh, okay.
So that would be
I
the
didn't
case.
know that was their way of thinking about us.
They do. We should establish a better dialogue. You see, even terminology doesn't match, and I think that is an important point here. And
exactly, I think that's one of the main points. You have to sort of speak the language of other people in order to communicate effectively.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Hi, so this is Rajan here. We have one question, I mean, two questions rather, but one is more about logistics. So Clarice or Ian, if you can paste the web link of call for papers, it might help the audience. Otherwise, we can post it on a LinkedIn and we can ask Peter to circulate it within the IBPSA later on as well. I did paste the journal website, but somebody's looking for call for papers for this special issue if we have that link. So that was one. Second is Professor Jankovic wants to ask a question, and let me unmute him so that he can ask directly. I think it must be very, very late in his country right now. Professor Jankovic, you're self-muted. Professor Jankovic, can you hear me? You're self-muted. Yeah, I can, but I can't unmute. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I think is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, that's good. Thanks very much for this. And it's not late in my country. It's actually just 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the UK. Thanks for this. So yes, I'm Lubo Jankovic, Professor of Advanced Building Design from the University of Hertfordshire and IBPSA Fellow since 2021. I have a question in terms of that I have for a number of years advocated the use of complexity science and bottom-up emergence in simulation. And it seems to me that simulation community has not yet embraced this. Now, the complexity of the subject area of this special issue requires, in my view, the use of complexity-based methods. For instance, you can't model a flock of birds using equations. You have to use something different. And in the same way, you cannot model this kind of multi-domain workflows for sustainable cities and communities using equations. So to what extent are the editors open to these new approaches?
Well, if you allow me to answer that, then I think we are absolutely open to this, because this would exactly be some novel way of looking at these things we are interested in. So yeah, please.
Okay, thank you very much.
Please submit.
I'll try, thank you.
I try to post the call here, but I'm not sure if it's visible from my screen.
No, so we have pasted, somebody has pasted a link for entire audience. I mean, it was pasted for the panelists, but I have circulated to the entire audience. So
okay.
Thanks. I think it was Camilla. Thanks, Camilla.
Okay.
Do we have any other question from the audience? No. So we can conclude, and can I hand it over to Laurie for concluding remarks?
Oh, I wasn't expecting that. Well, I'd just like to thank everyone very much for attending. I hope that we gave you a flavour of what it is we're trying to achieve. It's quite broad ranging, but I really think that it is time. I think that, you know, if Professor Jankovic is offering something that is as extreme as at the extreme end in terms of complexity science, as the simulation of excuse me, as the simulation of bird flight. I think that gives us plenty of scope, and that is really what we want to see. We do want to see simulation being used to address questions that have been touched on in the past, but to bring them more to the fore. If anyone has any further questions, then please do direct them to us directly or through the link that's been put into the chat box. And I think it just falls to me now to thank Ian for getting up early to join us, and to Jan for joining us, and to my fellow speakers, and of course to Rajan and Vishnu for setting all of this up for us. And thanks for attending. Thanks very much.
Thank you. With this, we conclude this webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening and have a rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.